A single chime could once orchestrate an entire civilization. The echoes of forgotten bells hold a secret history of human society, one written not in text, but in sound. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these instruments fundamentally shaped our world. We will uncover how a bell's ring could enforce laws from Rome to China, and why some cultures buried their dead with them. What does the sound of a bell make you feel deep down? The first bells were not born of factories but of fire and earth. Picture a lone artisan in a Bronze Age workshop, his hands covered in clay and soot as he pours glowing, molten metal into a custom mold. He is not just crafting a tool, he is giving form to a voice, one that will resonate for millennia. These ancient objects were fundamentally different from the clear, predictable bells we know today. They were forged from bronze, hammered from iron, or even shaped from simple pottery, each material giving its creation a distinct sonic character. The specific blend of copper and tin in a bronze bell, for instance, was not accidental. As one archaeoacoustician puts it, the alloy composition was a recipe for a cultural voice, a unique acoustic signature that could sound bright and piercing in one region, yet deep and somber in another. But the magic was not just in the metal. The entire process of creation was a ceremony. From the ritual selection of ores to the final casting, each step was imbued with spiritual meaning, transforming raw, earthly material into a sacred object believed to hold a spirit of its own. This carefully crafted voice, born from ritual and fire, was destined for its first and most important audience, the gods themselves. That resonant tone, born from fire, was first directed toward the heavens. In a world filled with invisible forces, the bell became a trusted messenger, its voice a bridge between the human and the divine. Think of a priest in a misty sanctuary, his hand pulling a rope not to gather a congregation, but to get the attention of the god residing within. The sound was not an announcement, it was an invocation, a deliberate act to awaken a celestial presence. This belief in the bell's spiritual power was remarkably widespread. In ancient Roman homes, small bronze bells known as tintinnabula were hung in doorways and gardens. Their gentle tinkling in the breeze was not merely decorative, it was a protective charm, a sonic fence believed to scare away malevolent spirits that might bring sickness or misfortune. Similarly, the robes of the Jewish high priest were adorned with small golden bells. As he moved through the sacred temple, their sound was a vital part of the ceremony, a holy noise that announced his entry into the presence of God and, according to tradition, protected him from divine wrath. A historian of religion explains that this was about more than just noise. The sound of the bell was thought to actively purify the air, clearing a space of chaotic or negative energies to create a suitable dwelling for a deity. It carved out what scholars call a soundscape of the sacred, an invisible boundary of holiness defined not by walls but by audible resonance. This sacred sound also structured ritual time, marking the beginning of a prayer, the climax of a sacrifice, or the moment a god was believed to descend. The bell's ring was the punctuation of the spiritual world, and if this sound could command the attention of gods, it was only a matter of time before earthly rulers realized it could also be used to command the obedience of men. That same sacred resonance soon found an echo in the heart of the city. In the bustling Roman Forum, the clear ring of a bell did not call upon the gods, it commanded the citizens. Its sound sliced through the din of commerce and conversation, signaling the official opening of the markets or summoning everyone to a vital public assembly. This was the civic bell, a fundamental tool for building the architecture of daily power. Its voice projected secular authority across the crowded cityscape, a function perfectly captured by the AES bells used in Roman courts. These were not mere noisemakers, they were instruments of legitimacy. A classical historian notes that the sound of such a bell gave political decrees their weight and enforced a new, critical concept for urban life: legal timekeeping. When the bell tolled, the court was in session, the market was legally open, or the assembly was officially begun. To ignore its call was to defy the state itself. This practice reveals a profound concept known as acoustic sovereignty. Control over the most significant sounds in a community was a direct expression of political power. Bells created an audible social hierarchy, telling people precisely when to work, when to trade, and when to gather. Their sound organized the chaotic flow of human activity into a disciplined rhythm, making the abstract idea of the law something you could literally hear. This powerful tool, which so clearly ordered the world of the living, would soon be called upon to guide souls through the ultimate transition. The bell's voice, which once commanded markets and called upon gods, also held a solemn duty at the very edge of life. In an ancient Greek funeral procession, the air would have been filled with a strange, whirring clatter from spinning clay bells called rhomboi. This was not a sound of sorrow, but of spiritual defense. The noise was believed to create a chaotic protective barrier, disorienting and driving away malevolent spirits drawn to the vulnerable soul of the deceased. This practice reveals a deep-seated belief that the sound of a bell could safeguard a person even in their final, most perilous journey. This concept was echoed in the elaborate tombs of the Etruscan civilization, where bells were carefully placed alongside the dead. These were not mere grave goods but permanent talismans, meant to offer eternal protection in the afterlife. Their silent presence in the dark was a promise that their voice, if needed, could still ring out to guard the eternal rest of the inhabitant. Far to the east, in ancient China, the massive Bienjong bells played a different but equally vital role in rituals of death. Their deep, resonant tones were central to ancestral worship ceremonies, their sound believed to be a conduit that could carry messages of respect and remembrance to the spirit world. A scholar of ancient death rituals explains that the bell's chime was thought to act as a sonic guide, illuminating the path for a soul navigating the confusing landscape between the living and the dead. This sound marked a boundary, a liminal space where one state of being ended and another began. It was the ultimate social transition made audible. The bell served a dual purpose, protecting the soul from harm while simultaneously announcing its passage into a new realm, ensuring the sacred order was maintained even in death. This profound connection between sound and the soul's journey shows how deeply these instruments were woven into the fabric of human existence, from our highest spiritual aspirations to our most fundamental fears. And just as their sound guided individuals through the final transition, they would soon be used to guide entire civilizations through the endless cycle of the seasons. That same bell that guided souls now synchronized the very lifeblood of civilization, the harvest. In the flat, sun-baked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the sound emanating from the great ziggurat did more than call the faithful. It told an entire village precisely when to open the irrigation canals or begin cutting the barley. The bell's ring was a command rooted in celestial observation, a direct signal from the priests who tracked the movements of the sun and moon. This was timekeeping on a grand, communal scale, where the sound of a bell translated the abstract passage of seasons into an immediate, actionable instruction for survival. An archaeoastronomer explains that specific bell tones were often linked to solar events, with a unique chime reserved for the spring equinox, another for the winter solstice. This auditory calendar created an unbreakable rhythm, a shared pulse that everyone in the community could feel and follow. There were no personal timepieces, no written schedules for the majority of people. The bell was the metronome of pre-modern life, its sound ensuring that the vital, back-breaking work of planting and harvesting happened in perfect unison. This auditory scheduling was the foundation of social and economic cohesion. A failed harvest meant starvation, and the bell's reliable voice was the best insurance against such a disaster. It organized labor, dictated the flow of water to the fields, and marked the days of great seasonal festivals that celebrated the earth cycles. The sound wove the individual efforts of hundreds of farmers into a single, coordinated effort, creating a collective rhythm essential for the community to endure and prosper. And just as this resonant tone could define the invisible boundaries of time, it was also used to mark the very real, physical borders of a community's world. The sacred sound that synchronized the harvest also mapped the world itself. A traveler on a dusty road in ancient India would first hear the city long before seeing its walls, a constant, shimmering drone of countless temple bells. This was not just background noise, it was an audible declaration of territory, a spiritual jurisdiction broadcast on the air. The city's identity was defined by this unique sonic signature, a concept cultural geographers call a sound mark. Just as a landmark is a distinctive visual feature, a sound mark is a community noise so unique it becomes inseparable from the place itself. This acoustic boundary was as real as any stone wall. In Greece, the ringing of a specific bell could mark the perimeter of a temple sanctuary, a zone of absolute safety. The moment a fugitive heard that sound, they knew they had reached a place where they could not be touched, where the bell's ring created an invisible, protective dome. The Romans took this idea of an audible border into the secular world, sometimes embedding small bells into the very boundary stones that marked property lines. If someone tried to move the stone clandestinely, the bell would ring out, turning a simple trespass into a publicly announced crime. These sounds controlled movement in a deeply intuitive way, signaling safety, warning of danger, and defining belonging. The bell made territory an experience you heard as much as you saw, mapping social and legal order directly onto the landscape. Having so effectively mapped the land, this powerful sound was then turned inward to map the human body and spirit in the chaos of war. That resonant voice which mapped territory and guided souls was also forged into a weapon of war. Amid the dust and thunder of an Assyrian chariot charge, the air would have been filled with a terrifying new sound, the frantic, metallic clatter of bronze bells strapped to the harnesses. This was not an accident of decoration, it was a deliberate act of psychological warfare. The goal was to overwhelm the enemy before the first arrow even flew, to transform the advancing army into a deafening, monstrous entity that shattered both concentration and courage. The Scythians, fierce nomadic warriors of the steppes, understood this power deeply. They used large ceremonial cauldrons adorned with clappers and bells in their war rituals, their chaotic ringing intended to call upon the favor of their gods while simultaneously unnerving their foes. Similarly, Celtic chariots, the shock troops of their age, were often outfitted with bells that jangled fiercely as they raced toward enemy lines. A military historian explains that the primary weapon here was not the blade, but the sound itself. It was designed to create utter sensory confusion, making it impossible for infantry to hear their commander's orders and causing enemy horses to panic and bolt. This auditory assault projected an image of invincibility and raw, untamed power, boosting the morale of the troops, creating the noise while instilling pure terror in those who heard it. The battlefield cacophony turned sound into a tangible, physical force as real as any volley of spears. It was the art of war conducted not just with steel but with calculated resonance. After such brutal chaos, the same instrument was then refined to orchestrate the most delicate and structured of human interactions, the elaborate rituals of royal power. The same sound that could shatter an enemy line was meticulously refined to orchestrate absolute power within the palace walls. In the vast audience hall of China's Han Dynasty, the emperor did not simply rule, he performed his authority to the resonant soundtrack of a bronze orchestra. Massive sets of tuned bells, known as Bienjong, hung in precise rows, their polished surfaces catching the light. Each movement of the sovereign, from his stately entrance to the raising of his hand, was accompanied by a specific, harmonious melody played by a team of highly trained musicians. This was not a concert for enjoyment, it was high-stakes political theater. An ethnomusicologist explains that these Bienjong sets were technological marvels, each bell capable of producing two distinct, pure notes when struck in different spots. Arranged in a grand carillon, they formed a complete pentatonic scale, allowing for the performance of complex ritual music. The control over this intricate sound system was a powerful metaphor for the emperor's own control. Just as a conductor commands every note from his musicians, the emperor, through this sonic display, demonstrated his command over the vast, complex machinery of the state. The harmony of the bells was a direct representation of the social and cosmic harmony he was duty-bound to maintain. Every perfectly executed chord was an audible promise that order prevailed under his watch. This grand orchestration of power, however, relied entirely on the skilled hands of a select few, the masters of this resonant craft. How could a bell crafted in Mycenaean Greece ring with a perfect, clear pitch, a triumph of acoustic engineering from a time we consider a technological dawn? The answer lies not in written formulas but in the guarded, almost sacred knowledge of the artisan. These masters were far more than metalworkers. They were the earliest physicists, blending rigorous science with deep spiritual intuition to give their culture a literal voice. Their primary tool was a revolutionary technique known as the lost wax method. An artisan would begin by sculpting a perfect model of the bell in beeswax, every curve and thickness meticulously shaped by hand and ear. This wax model was then encased in a thick, heat-resistant clay, creating a mold. Once fired, the wax would melt and drain away, leaving behind a hollow, negative space in the exact shape of the bell. Into this perfect cavity, glowing, liquid bronze was poured. When the metal cooled and the clay mold was broken apart, the bell was born. But the true secret, the magic that gave the bell its soul, was in the metal itself. The bronze was not a simple mixture. It was a precise alloy, a recipe passed down through generations. The ratio of copper to tin was everything. A slight variation of just a few percent could mean the difference between a bell that sang with a pure, long-lasting tone and one that sounded dull, short, and cracked. A modern bell maker who recreates these ancient instruments describes the process as part chemistry, part alchemy, and part sheer guesswork. He explains that these ancient founders had no oscilloscopes or tuning forks. They relied on an intuitive sense, a feel for the metal, and a deep memory for sound, honed over a lifetime. They listened to the molten metal as it cooled, they watched its color, they understood its spirit. This knowledge was so powerful, so central to the identity of a people, that it was protected within closed guilds, often passed only from father to son. These artisans held the power to determine whether their city's bell would sound a warning that inspired courage or a call to prayer that brought peace. They were the unseen architects of social order, their craft defining the very soundscape of antiquity. So what specific messages did these carefully tuned voices carry across the ancient world? An initiate in the sacred Eleusinian mysteries did not merely hear a bell, he listened for its grammar, the precise number of chimes, the pauses between them, the rhythm of the strikes. This was a coded language understood only by those taught to decipher it. 2 rings might signal the beginning of a purification rite, while 3 rapid strikes could indicate the moment of a divine vision. This was not unique to Greece. In the heart of Rome, the complex rituals of the Lupercalia festival were guided by a similar auditory code, where changes in the bell's tempo directed the priests through each precise phase of the ceremony, from the sacrifice to the frenzied run through the city. Far across the world, in the meticulously planned cities of the Han Dynasty, the bell's language was one of civic survival. A single, sustained toll from the watchtower might signal a fire in the merchant's quarter, while a rapid, frantic clanging indicated a breach in the city walls. Every citizen, from the general to the farmer, knew to listen for the difference. A semi-artisan would explain that these bells were not just making noise, they were operating within a sophisticated symbolic system. The sound itself became a signifier, its pitch, rhythm, and repetition carrying specific, agreed-upon meanings much like words in a sentence. To the trained ear, a sequence of rings was a rich, instructional statement. It could mean close the gates, or the god is present, or assemble the council. This reveals a layer of ancient literacy we have almost entirely lost, a fluency in a language written not in ink but in air. And just as the spoken word changes from region to region, this resonant vocabulary was not universal. The very meaning of a bell's voice shifted dramatically as you traveled from the misty highlands of one civilization to the sun-baked plains of another. 2 bells separated by a continent tell a story of 2 distinct worlds. In a modest Roman home, a small bronze tintinnabulum dangles near the family shrine, its gentle tinkle a private whisper against wandering spirits. This sound was intimate and protective, a personal charm for domestic safety. Half a world away, in the echoing silence of a Chinese imperial tomb, stands a massive Bienjong set, its 64 bronze bells arranged on lacquered frames, waiting to voice the harmony of the cosmos. This instrument was not for a single household, but for the entire state. Its calibrated tones meant to regulate imperial ceremonies and communicate with the ancestral order. A comparative historian of ancient sound notes that this stark contrast is no accident. The Roman bell reflects a society built on the bedrock of the family unit, the domus, where personal piety and the protection of the home were paramount. Its sound was a shield. The Chinese bell, however, embodies a centralized hierarchical empire where the emperor's primary role was to maintain balance between heaven and earth. Its complex, melodic voice was a tool of that cosmic governance. Here, the same fundamental object, a resonating vessel of metal, was shaped by entirely different priorities. One culture miniaturized it for personal defense, the other monumentalized it for imperial performance. This divergence in material culture is a direct reflection of deeper social structures and worldviews. The Roman focus was inward, on the sanctity of the private space, while the Chinese focus was outward, on the orchestration of a universal order. Both were profound innovations, yet they channeled the power of sound down 2 remarkably different paths, proving that a society's soul can be heard in the objects it chooses to give a voice. Our journey now takes us to a culture that listened to a different kind of resonance entirely. Iron was the voice of the Celtic world. In a mist-shrouded oak grove, a druid would not chant or sing to mark the climax of a ritual. He would ring a simple, hand-forged iron bell. Its sound was raw and earthy, a stark contrast to the polished bronze tones of the Mediterranean. This choice of material was no accident. the Celts held iron in deep reverence, seeing in its strength a connection to the earth's power and the world of the gods. This sacred metal gave form to an instrument that bridged the everyday and the spiritual in a uniquely Celtic way. We see this profound connection in an incredible artifact known as the Deskford Carnix. This was not a simple bell but a massive, boar-headed war trumpet, and mounted at the opening of its fearsome mouth was a bronze clapper in the shape of a ball. When swung, the entire instrument would have produced a deep, resonant roar combined with a metallic clatter. A Celtic studies expert explains that this fusion of sound was intentional, a deliberate blurring of the line between the battlefield and the ceremony. The Carnix was used to terrify enemies in war, but it was also played in rituals to communicate with the otherworld, the Celtic realm of deities and ancestors. The bell's voice was central to both functions, its sound believed to carry messages directly to the gods. This deep connection extended to the widespread Celtic cult of the head, which venerated the skull as the seat of the soul and a source of spiritual power. Bells, with their hollow, resonating bodies, were often seen as metallic echoes of the human head, their sound representing the voice of the spirit within. This belief made them powerful tools for divination and healing. A healer might ring a specific sequence over a wound to drive out sickness, or a seer would listen to the overtones of a struck bell to interpret the will of the gods. Beyond the sacred grove, the bell was also a clear marker of personal status. The size and craftsmanship of an iron bell worn on a chieftain's belt or harness spoke directly to his wealth and authority. Its sound announced his approach and confirmed his place in the social order, making his power audible to all. The Celtic path reveals a different relationship with resonant sound, one where the boundary between the spiritual and the secular was far more fluid than in Rome or China. Their bells were not tools for state control or cosmic harmony, but intimate instruments for navigating a world alive with spirits. This distinct voice, born of iron and oak, would soon find itself competing with a new sound carried on the wind, the ringing of commerce along vast desert trade routes. Across the vast silence of the Taklamakan Desert, a caravan's approach was announced long before it was seen by a steady, rhythmic chorus of bells. Each camel in the line wore them not as ornament but as essential equipment. Their sound was a practical lifeline, a constant auditory thread that prevented animals from straying into the featureless dunes and becoming lost forever. But that same sound also carried a dual message to those who heard it from a distance. For a solitary shepherd, it might signal the arrival of potential trade, a chance to barter for exotic goods. For a band of raiders, however, it was the sound of a moving target, a signal of both opportunity and risk. This desert chorus was the pulse of early globalization, the auditory signature of commerce itself. In the bustling markets of Palmyra, the air would have been a symphony of such sounds, with the clear rings of transaction bells mingling with the lower tones of caravan animals arriving from Persia and Rome. Down in the ports of the ancient Indus Valley, the ringing of bells likely coordinated the loading of ships with precious cargo, their sound carrying over the water. An economic historian notes that you can almost map the major trade routes by tracing the spread of specific bell designs. A distinct style of bronze bell found in a Sogdian trader's cache might have its direct counterpart unearthed hundreds of miles away in a Chinese frontier town, proving that ideas and music traveled alongside spices and silk. This was more than just noise, it was a primitive but highly effective security system. The constant ringing allowed drovers to monitor their valuable assets by ear, even in pitch darkness or sandstorms, ensuring that a silent camel was quickly noted and found. And at the end of a grueling day's journey, the sound guided weary travelers to the lights of a caravanserai. There, the ringing of a large temple bell within the walls would mark the evening prayer, offering spiritual solace and a moment of shared community for men from a dozen different cultures. The bell's sound was the unwavering rhythm of connection in a fragmented world, orchestrating the movement of goods, people, and ideas across continents. The tomb of Marquis Yi of Zheng contained not treasure, but an orchestra in bronze, a complete set of 65 bells awaiting his command in the afterlife. This was the Bienjong, a pinnacle of acoustic engineering where each massive bell was meticulously tuned to produce not one, but two distinct, pure musical notes. A single set could span 5 octaves, its range rivaling a modern piano, capable of performing intricate melodies and complex harmonies that would have filled a royal court. The creation of such an instrument required a staggering understanding of physics, a precise science of shape, thickness, and alloy that these ancient founders mastered without any of our modern tools. A musicologist who has studied these sets explains that the arrangement of the bells reveals a sophisticated grasp of scales and harmonics. They were organized not just by size, but by a complete musical theory, their tones calibrated to create the perfect pentatonic scale essential for ritual music. This was not casual noise-making, it was a high art form, the ancient equivalent of a symphony orchestra carved from metal. These bronze orchestras provided the soundtrack for the most critical moments of state. Their harmonious chords accompanied lavish banquets, impressing foreign diplomats with the wealth and refinement of the court. The same music solemnized grand religious ceremonies, the sound believed to please the gods and maintain cosmic balance. For the elite, this was the ultimate display of power and culture, a demonstration that their rule was as ordered and harmonious as the music they commissioned. The artistic and the political were inseparable. The bell's melody was the sound of a civilized, orderly world. Yet this same civilization that produced such breathtaking harmony could also wield the bell's voice to create its opposite, a sound of pure control and terror. That same resonant voice which guided souls and orchestrated power could also become the sound of a cage. In the humid heat of a Roman latifundia, the constant, tinny jingle did not signal the start of a ceremony, but the ceaseless labor of an enslaved workforce. Each person was forced to wear a small bell on a leather or metal collar, their every step transformed into an audible tag for their overseer. This was not a symbolic gesture, it was a brutal system of acoustic surveillance, a way to monitor movement and prevent escape without the master needing to constantly look. The sound announced the enslaved person's presence in any space, stripping them of the simple, fundamental human right to auditory privacy. Archaeological finds from across the ancient world corroborate this practice, from simple bronze bells with iron collars found in Roman contexts to descriptions in ancient Indian texts of slaves and prisoners being made to wear bells as a mark of their low status. A historian specializing in the ancient slave trade explains that this weaponization of sound was a deliberate act of dehumanization. It turned a human being into a walking, talking alarm system, their own body betraying their location at all times. The psychological impact of this constant surveillance is almost impossible to overstate. Imagine the mental exhaustion of knowing you could never move silently, that any attempt to pause, to rest, or to have a private conversation was immediately given away by your own personal soundtrack. This sound created an invisible leash, a perimeter of control defined not by walls but by noise. It served as a constant, humiliating reminder of one's position at the very bottom of the social order. This oppressive use stands in jarring contrast to the bell's sacred roles, highlighting its profound functional ambivalence, an object that could connect a community with the divine one moment and enforce the subjugation of its most vulnerable members the next. Yet, even within this system of control, the human spirit sought to reclaim its voice, often through the very same object used to enforce silence. A dancer's graceful turn was announced by more than just her movement. In the vibrant courts of Minoan Crete, a woman of high status moved to a rhythm accentuated by her own body, a delicate chime emanating from a belt of tiny, perfectly crafted gold bells. This was Adornment as a multi-sensory experience, a declaration of identity you could both see and hear. Far from being simple decorations, these personal bells served a powerful dual purpose, blending beauty with deeply held belief. Across the ancient world, from the goldsmiths of Egypt to the bustling cities of the Indus Valley, people wore their soundscape on their bodies, anklets with silver bells, bracelets of copper, and hair ornaments featuring tiny clappers were common. An expert in ancient adornment explains that these items were a form of apotropaic magic, a wearable defense system. The sound they produced with every step or gesture was thought to create an invisible barrier against the evil eye, sickness, or malevolent spirits. The choice of material was crucial. A bell made of precious gold or silver was not just a display of wealth, it was an investment in spiritual security, the finest metals believed to hold the greatest protective power. This created a deeply personal soundscape, a mobile zone of safety that moved with the individual through the crowded market, the dark street, or the sacred temple. The wearer carried their own aura of protection, their social standing and spiritual well-being announced by a gentle, constant music. This intimate relationship with sound reveals how thoroughly it was woven into the fabric of daily existence, a personal charm and a public statement in one. But what became of these resonant civilizations when their defining voices were suddenly muted? What happens when the bells stop ringing? The familiar ring of the Roman tintinnabulum grew fainter, then fell silent. As Christianity consolidated its power across the late Roman Empire, it systematically dismantled the acoustic world of its predecessors. The gentle tinkling that once guarded pagan doorways was now seen as the chatter of demons, and the grand bells that called citizens to baths and markets were melted down for coin or reforged into the new voice of authority, the church bell. This was not merely a change in music, but a fundamental restructuring of the soundscape. A late antique historian describes this shift as the replacement of one sonic symbol with another, where the diffuse, personal sounds of domestic paganism were supplanted by a centralized, public Christian sound. The new bells did not protect a single home from spirits, they called an entire community to a single god. This transition was accelerated by violent political collapse. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the intricate civic machinery that bells once orchestrated, the court schedules and market hours simply vanished. The specialized knowledge required to cast bells for specific pagan rituals, from the Lupercalia to the cult of Isis, was no longer passed down. The artisans who understood the sacred alloys and shapes died, their secrets buried with them. This created a profound rupture in the acoustic landscape, a great silencing of ancient sonic identities. So how can we possibly hear these lost sounds? The evidence is fragmentary, but it is there. Archaeologists find the rusted iron remains of slave collars, silent testaments to a brutal sound of control. They unearth broken clay rhomboi from Greek graves, their whirring song stilled forever. And sometimes, in the corner of a pagan temple site converted into an early church, they discover a single, small bronze bell, hidden as if its owner could not bear to see it destroyed, a final, mute echo of a world that was closing its ears. That corroded bronze lump in the archaeologist's hand is a frozen echo. The true challenge begins not with finding the artifact, but with learning to listen to its long, silent story. Every fleck of soil, every green trace of corrosion, is a piece of evidence in a cold case spanning thousands of years. The first clue often lies in the ground itself, in the discovery of a casting pit. This is the bell's birthplace, a hollow in the earth lined with fired clay and filled with fragments of the original mold. By analyzing the vitrified walls of the pit and the ceramic remnants, scientists can determine the incredible temperatures ancient metalworkers achieved, and sometimes even find fingerprints left in the clay by the artisan who sealed the mold. This physical connection to the Creator is just the start. The bell's broken pieces are then subjected to intense scientific scrutiny. Using techniques like X-ray fluorescence, researchers can pinpoint the exact alloy composition, the precise ratio of copper to tin that gave this particular bell its unique voice. A slight variation in the mix, detectable only by these advanced means, could explain why one city's bells sounded bright and commanding, while another's were deep and somber. But how do we hear the sound itself? This is where digital magic enters the picture. Through high-resolution 3D scanning, every crack, curve, and internal contour of a broken bell is captured. This digital ghost is then fed into an acoustic modeling program. A scientist working in archaeoacoustics describes the process as a form of sonic resurrection. The software calculates how the original, complete object would have vibrated, simulating the sound waves it would have produced. We can now, in effect, ring a bell that shattered centuries ago. Sometimes the most intimate secrets are hidden inside. Residue analysis of the soil trapped within a bell's core can reveal startling details. Traces of organic material, like specific pollens or ash, might indicate that the bell was filled with sacred herbs or the burnt remains of a sacrificial offering before its final sealing, literally locking a prayer or a spirit within its form. Yet for all this technology, context remains the most crucial interpreter. A bell found in a grave has a profoundly different story from one unearthed in a temple treasury or discarded in a smithy's trash pit. Its location tells us who was listening. Was it intended for the ears of gods, the command of a king, or the protection of a single family? This painstaking detective work, blending earth science with digital art, allows us to reassemble not just objects but the very atmosphere of the past. We are learning to hear the world as our ancestors did, one reconstructed chime at a time. You can now slip on a pair of headphones and listen to a sound that has not been heard for 2,000 years. The precise, resonant chime of an Etruscan funerary bell rings out clear and full, recreated not from a surviving instrument but from a digital ghost. This is the frontier of archaeoacoustics, where archaeologists, acoustic engineers, and sound artists collaborate to resurrect the sonic landscapes of the past. They begin with a high-resolution 3D scan of a fragile, often broken artifact. This digital model captures every microscopic imperfection, every variation in the bell's thickness, because these are the very features that gave the original its unique voice. Then, through a process called physical modeling synthesis, the computer does not merely play a recording, it simulates the physics of the bell itself. It calculates how the metal would have vibrated, how the sound waves would have emanated from the lip, and how they would have decayed over time. This reveals far more than a single musical note. A spectral analysis of this virtual sound unpacks the bell's entire acoustic character, its complex tapestry of overtones that would have made it sound bright or somber, piercing or warm to an ancient ear. One sound artist deeply involved in such a project described the first time he heard a successful reconstruction as a moment of profound time travel. He said it was not just a scientific achievement, but an emotional one, a sudden, intimate connection to the person who last heard that sound in its original context. Hearing these lost frequencies forces a difficult question. What have we sacrificed in our own modern soundscape? We live in a world of compressed digital audio and constant chaotic noise. The ancient world, by contrast, was often punctuated by these singular, purposeful, and deeply resonant tones. Each bell's ring was an event, a sound imbued with specific meaning, power, and spiritual significance. To hear one today is to remember that we have largely lost this vocabulary of resonant communication, this understanding of sound as a sacred, structuring force in human life. A Roman citizen could navigate their entire day by sound alone. The first chime from the Capitol signaled the market's opening. A later, deeper toll from the basilica meant the courts were in session, and a rapid, rhythmic pealing from a local temple announced a sacrifice was underway. This was a world where sound carried specific, vital information, a nuanced language of bells that structured life with purpose and meaning. Now, step into the relentless roar of a modern city. The air is a thick soup of undifferentiated noise, a constant barrage of traffic hum, construction din, and the anonymous shriek of sirens. These are not signals, but a chaotic cacophony that we have learned, out of necessity, to mostly ignore. A sensory historian would describe this as a collapse of our acoustic ecology. Where ancient soundscapes were layered with intention, ours are flattened by pollution. We have traded a rich auditory lexicon for a monotonous din. This shift has profound consequences. The ancient skill of deep listening, the ability to discern subtle variations in pitch, rhythm, and repetition, has largely atrophied. Where a villager could distinguish between the bell signaling a fire and the one calling for a harvest, we hear only an emergency siren, a generic alarm that tells us to get out of the way but offers no deeper story. Our experience of community and time has become more abstract, dominated by the silent, private glow of screens and digital clocks. We no longer share a collective rhythm dictated by a communal voice heard by all. The loss of ceremonial bells and their structured sounds severed a fundamental tie, moving us from a shared auditory reality to a fragmented, visual one. This begs a reflective question: when was the last time you truly listened to the world around you, not as background noise, but as a channel of potential meaning? Yet, against all odds, fragments of this ancient sonic world stubbornly persist. In a remote alpine village, the air shakes with a sound that would have been perfectly familiar to an Iron Age Celt. Men and women dressed in traditional costume strap massive, clanking cowbells to their bodies, their rhythmic, thunderous dance shaking the very ground. Ethnographers recognize this not as a quaint folk performance, but as a direct, unbroken survival of a pre-Christian ritual, a practice once meant to awaken the earth from its winter slumber and drive away malevolent spirits. This is not an isolated case. Across the world, ancient bell traditions have survived not in museums but in the living breath of communities. In Japan, the deep, mournful toll of the Bonsho temple bell is produced using casting techniques that have been passed down, virtually unchanged for over 1,000 years. The precise alloy, the painstaking mold construction, the spiritual purification of the founders, all of it echoes the sacred metallurgy of antiquity. Similarly, in certain Sufi ceremonies, the rhythmic ringing of small bells during spiritual whirling is a practice that acoustic historians can trace back through time, finding its origins in the trance-inducing rites of ancient Mesopotamia. A folklorist describes these traditions as cultural palimpsests, like an ancient parchment that was scraped clean and written over, but where the original text still shows through. The surface meaning may have been Christianized or Islamicized or modernized, but the fundamental grammar of the ritual remains intact. The connection between a specific, resonant sound and the structuring of a sacred moment has endured. These are not mere echoes, they are living bridges. They prove that the ancient understanding of sound as a tool for shaping reality, for marking community, and for connecting with the transcendent was not extinguished. It was simply repurposed, its power too profound to ever be fully silenced. This legacy hums all around us, often in the most unexpected places, if we only know how to listen. That small, protective tintinnabulum hanging in a Roman doorway was a private whisper. The great bell swinging in a medieval church tower was a public shout to an entire city. Yet the voice was fundamentally the same. The Christian church did not invent the bell. It inherited a tool of immense social power and simply gave it a new theological purpose. A medieval historian explains that this was a classic process of cultural absorption. The deep-seated human instinct to associate a clear, resonant metal sound with order, protection, and community was too powerful to ignore, so the church wisely channeled it. The bell's ancient role in marking time was seamlessly adopted into the canonical hours, its chimes structuring the day around prayers like matins and vespers instead of market openings or court sessions. Its spiritual function as a protective charm was expanded from guarding a single home to shielding an entire parish from demons and storms. The call to a pagan festival was transformed into the summons to Mass, gathering the community under a new banner. The technology itself had to evolve to fulfill this grander, louder mission. The small, handheld bells of late antiquity gradually grew in size, requiring the development of stronger swinging mechanisms and the architectural innovation of the bell tower or steeple. This was not merely a practical necessity, it was a symbolic one. Placing the bell high above the town made its voice the dominant sound for miles around, a constant auditory reminder of the church's central role in daily life. The medieval church bell is therefore not a break from the past, but the direct descendant of the Roman AES and the Celtic iron bell, carrying forward a millennia-old understanding that the control of significant sound is the control of social and spiritual life itself. So what are the core principles that made this object so universally effective across countless cultures and centuries? That solemn resonance taps into a biological alarm system hardwired into our very being. Our brains are exquisitely tuned to the specific acoustic properties of a ringing bell, a response forged not in culture but in our shared evolutionary past. The sharp, sudden onset of a bell's chime triggers what cognitive scientists call the hazard precaution system, an ancient neural circuit designed for immediate survival. This is the same primal jolt you feel when a twig snaps in a silent forest, a deep-seated signal that demands your attention and prepares your body for action. An expert in cognitive archaeology explains that this is not a learned behavior, but a fundamental biological reflex. A loud, non-vocal sound with a rapid onset, like a bell, is processed by the brain as a potential threat, forcing a state of heightened alertness that cuts through all other distractions. This explains the bell's unparalleled power as an alarm, a power that rulers and priests harnessed for millennia, but this same sound can also soothe. The sustained, resonant tone that follows the initial strike produces a completely different effect. This lingering vibration, rich with harmonic overtones, can actually entrain our brainwaves. Psychoacoustics reveals that these pure, low-frequency sounds can gently guide our brain activity from a state of frantic beta waves into the calmer, more focused alpha state. This is the science behind the meditative calm felt in a temple where the bell's decay is not an end but an invitation to inner stillness. This duality, the capacity to both alarm and pacify, is rooted in the physics of metal itself. When struck, bronze or iron vibrates in a complex yet orderly way, producing a sound with a strong fundamental frequency and a clear series of harmonious overtones. This acoustic purity allows the sound to travel vast distances with minimal distortion, cutting through noise and carrying its message, whether one of warning or worship, across a landscape. This physical property made metal the perfect material for social coordination. Furthermore, this resonant quality enables a phenomenon known as entrainment, where the rhythmic tolling of a bell can synchronize the behavior of a large group. The steady, predictable pulse of a bell marking the hours creates a collective rhythm, aligning individual heartbeats and actions into a unified social body, whether for work, prayer, or defense. We are neurologically susceptible to this call to order. These principles are not locked in the past. They are a form of ancient sonic wisdom that we can apply to our own noisy modern lives. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the chaotic din of the world, consider listening to a recording of a single, slow ringing bell. You are not just hearing a historical artifact, you are engaging with a sound engineered by evolution and refined by antiquity to recalibrate your own mind. Our own cities are shouting at us, and we have forgotten how to listen. The ancient world understood something we have largely lost, that sound can be a tool for building community, not just a byproduct of it. Imagine an urban planner today, not just arranging buildings and parks, but consciously designing a soundscape. They could draw direct inspiration from the acoustic sovereignty of Rome or the harmonic order of the Han Dynasty. Instead of allowing the chaotic noise of traffic to dominate, they could introduce intentional, resonant sounds at key public spaces. A specific, gentle chime from a clock tower could mark the beginning of a farmer's market, just as a Roman bell once opened the forum. Another distinct tone could signal the start of an evening concert in the park, creating a shared auditory cue that draws people together. This is not about adding more noise, but about replacing meaningless cacophony with meaningful sound. A contemporary sound designer working on such projects explains that we are essentially trying to re-enchant our shared environments. We are using sound to carve out moments of collective experience in an otherwise fragmented urban life. The goal is to create what he calls acoustic anchors, familiar and reassuring sounds that give people a shared rhythm and a sense of place. This principle extends far beyond the town square. In a modern office, the harsh, sudden ring of a telephone or a generic electronic alert creates a spike of stress, triggering that primal hazard precaution system. But what if the notification for a team meeting was a soft, resonant bell tone? This subtle shift could frame the gathering as a collaborative event rather than an interruption, using sound to encourage focus instead of anxiety. For a public memorial, the lessons are even more profound. A single, slowly tolling bell at a commemorative ceremony does more than mark silence. It creates a container for collective grief and reflection, its decaying sound allowing emotion to resonate just as it did in ancient funeral rites. The biggest question this raises is whether we are brave enough to redesign our world not just for the eye but for the ear. Can we relearn the ancient art of using resonance to build belonging, and in doing so, find a new kind of social harmony? Even the most perfectly reconstructed bell cannot tell us the melody it was born to play. We can calculate the precise pitch of every instrument in Marquis' bronze orchestra, but the grand compositions that once filled his court are lost to us forever. What complex harmonies accompanied the declaration of a new law or the arrival of a foreign ambassador? The scores, if they were ever written down, have crumbled to dust. This is one of the great silences in our historical record. Beyond the grand spectacles, even more elusive are the secret sonic codes of the mystery cults. An initiate in the rites of Cybele or Mithras might have learned a sequence of chimes that signaled a moment of divine revelation, a pattern that would be meaningless to an outsider. These were sounds not meant for public consumption, but for the ears of a select few, and their specific rhythms died with the last believer. A researcher studying these gaps admits that for every artifact we can explain, another defies all logic. Archaeologists have unearthed bell-like objects crafted from precious metals that possess no internal clapper and could never have been struck. Were these purely symbolic, meant to represent the idea of a sound rather than produce one, or did they serve a function in a ritual we can no longer comprehend? Other finds are just as baffling, like a cache of perfectly tuned bells discovered in a remote building that showed no signs of being a temple or a palace. Why was such a valuable and sophisticated instrument placed far from any apparent audience? These silent enigmas remind us that the past holds its secrets close. The echoes of these forgotten bells have traveled for millennia to reach us, but some messages were whispered too softly, meant only for their own time. And in that silence lies an enduring invitation to keep listening, to keep questioning, for the story of human civilization is never fully told. We began by listening for echoes, and we have found a symphony. The forgotten bells of antiquity were never just simple instruments of metal. They were the vibrating core of social order itself, the voice of ceremony, and a fundamental technology for structuring all of human experience. Their sound wove the very fabric of ancient life, from defining sacred space to marking the hours of the day, from terrifying enemies on the battlefield to guiding souls through the ultimate transition. This entire exploration reveals a profound truth. To truly understand these civilizations, we must learn to listen to their world, not just look at the ruins they left behind. The echo of these bells is not truly forgotten. It resonates in our own deep longing for community, for meaning, and for a sense of order in our often noisy and chaotic modern world. So I encourage you to do something simple yet transformative. Step outside today, just for a moment, and truly listen to the sounds around you. What are they telling you about the society you live in? Is it a chorus of connection or a cacophony of isolation? If this journey into the lost soundscapes of the past has intrigued you, consider subscribing for more explorations into history's deepest mysteries. And I would love to hear your thoughts. What ancient sound do you wish you could travel back in time to hear for yourself? Let me know in the comments below.